Rain slammed against the glass walls as Clara Bennett stood frozen in a $50,000 gown, fingers tightening around a champagne flute while a woman behind her laughed in French. She barely speaks English. Then a man added in Japanese, "Just another pretty contract." And Alexander Hayes said nothing, not even a glance, as if she were invisible, as if he owned her silence. But Clara slowly turned, eyes steady, voice calm. "Actually, I understood every word." The room stilled. She switched to flawless French, dismantling the insult. Then Japanese, sharper, precise. Then Spanish. Then German, each sentence cutting deeper, exposing their arrogance, their deal, their lies. 5 languages, 1 truth. And finally, in English, she faced Alexander. "You didn't marry a doll. You underestimated a mind." The glass slipped from someone's hand. Alexander's expression cracked for the first time, control gone, power shifting in real time. And Clara stepped back, removing her ring. "This contract ends tonight," she whispered, turning toward the door as the billionaire who thought he owned everything realized. He had just lost the only woman who ever saw through him. "If you want control, marry someone who can't fight back." The words hang cold in the air as Clara Bennett sits across from Alexander Hayes, her fingers curled tightly around a cup of untouched coffee, the steam long gone, her reflection faint in the polished table surface. A girl in a borrowed coat sitting in a room she clearly doesn't belong in, while across from her, a man in a perfectly tailored suit watches her like he's already made the decision for both of them. "It's simple," he says, sliding a thick contract across the table. "You marry me for 12 months. You follow the rules, and in return, your debts disappear." Clara's eyes flicker for just a second, not at him, but at the number printed near the bottom. Enough to cover hospital bills, enough to stop the letters, the calls, the quiet fear that has been sitting in her chest for months. "Why me?" she asks, her voice steady but soft, and Alexander leans back slightly, studying her. "Because you're invisible," he says plainly. "No connections, no reputation to protect, no one who'll question it." The words land heavier than they should, but Clara doesn't react, not outwardly, just a small inhale, a quiet shift in her posture. "And you think I'll just say yes?" she asks, and for the first time, there's the faintest hint of something in her tone, something he doesn't quite register. "You don't have better options," he replies, calm, certain, already moving on as if the conversation is over, as if she's already agreed. Silence stretches between them, filled only by the distant hum of traffic outside and the quiet ticking of a clock somewhere in the room. Clara's gaze drops to the contract again, pages filled with conditions, restrictions, boundaries, a life defined in clauses and signatures, no love, no questions, no voice unless permitted. She traces the edge of the paper lightly, as if memorizing it, then looks up, meeting his eyes fully for the first time. "And if I embarrass you?" she asks, and Alexander almost smiles, a cold, dismissive curve of his lips. "You won't," he says, "because you'll remember your place." Another pause, longer this time, heavier, and then Clara reaches for the pen, her hand steady now, far steadier than it was moments ago. She signs her name in clean, deliberate strokes, each letter precise, controlled, practiced. She slides the contract back toward him without hesitation, and for a brief second, something unreadable passes through her eyes, something that doesn't match the quiet, naive image he's already placed on her. "Good," Alexander says, standing, already turning away, already thinking 3 steps ahead. "We get married tomorrow." But as Clara rises, pulling her coat tighter around her shoulders, there's a quiet shift in the air, subtle, almost invisible, like a line has just been drawn that only she can see. And as she follows him out into the cold New York evening, her voice barely above a whisper, almost lost in the city noise, 12 months, she repeats softly, not to him, but to herself. And if anyone had been close enough to hear it, they might have noticed that she didn't sound afraid at all. "Stand still." The stylist's voice is sharp but controlled as Clara Bennett faces the full-length mirror, her reflection almost unrecognizable beneath layers of silk and structure, a fitted ivory dress replacing the worn fabric she arrived in just hours ago, her hair swept back, her posture corrected, every detail adjusted to fit a world she was never meant to enter. and yet her eyes remain the same, calm, observant, taking everything in without a single wasted reaction. Chin up, another voice says, guiding her gently but firmly. You are marrying Alexander Hayes. You represent his name now. The words echo, not as pressure, but as information, something to be filed away, understood, and used, because Clara is already learning the rules faster than anyone expects. Across the room, Alexander stands near the window, speaking quietly on his phone, his tone clipped, efficient. No press, no guests, keep it private, he says, glancing briefly toward her reflection, before looking away, as if confirming something, not about her, but about the arrangement. When the call ends, he approaches, his presence shifting the air around him, controlled, composed, untouchable. The ceremony is in 30 minutes, he says, adjusting his cufflinks. You will follow my lead. Answer only when spoken to, and do not improvise. Clara meets his gaze through the mirror, not defiant, not submissive, just steady. And if someone speaks to me in another language, she asks, quietly, almost casually, and for a split second, there is a pause, small but real, before he dismisses it. They will not. He replies, already turning away, already certain, but Clara says nothing more, only a faint nod, as if accepting the rule, as if filing that answer away too. Moments later, she stands beside him in a quiet private hall, the city skyline stretching beyond the glass like a distant promise. The officiant speaking in measured tones, words about agreement, about partnership, about commitment that feel almost detached from reality. Because this is not love, it is structure, it is strategy, it is survival. And when Alexander takes her hand, his grip is firm, controlled, not unkind, but not warm either. Do you agree? The officiant asks, and Clara answers, clear, unwavering. I do. Not louder than necessary, not softer than expected, just exactly right. The ring slides onto her finger, cool and precise, a symbol not of emotion, but of terms fulfilled. And as the officiant finishes, Alexander leans slightly closer, his voice low enough that only she can hear. Remember, this is temporary, he says, and Clara turns her head just enough to meet his eyes, a quiet flicker of something unreadable passing through her expression. Everything is, she replies softly. And for a moment, just a moment, Alexander does not respond, not because he cannot, but because something about the way she said it does not fit the role he assigned her. And as they step forward together, husband and wife in name, cameras absent, witnesses minimal, the world outside continues as if nothing has changed, but inside that quiet space, something has already begun to shift, something subtle, something patient, something waiting. The doors of the penthouse open without a sound, revealing a space that feels less like a home and more like a statement. Floor-to-ceiling glass stretching across nearly 40 feet of skyline. The city lights below flickering like something distant and untouchable, and Clara Bennett pauses for half a second at the threshold, not in awe, not in hesitation, but in quiet observation, taking in every detail, the polished marble floors, the controlled temperature, the silence that feels curated. While behind her Alexander Hayes walks in without slowing, already loosening his tie, already moving through the space like it belongs to him because it does. Your room is down the hall on the left, he says without looking back, his tone even, practiced. We will maintain separate spaces. Clara steps inside, her shoes barely making a sound against the marble, her hand brushing lightly against the edge of a table as if grounding herself in something real. Understood, she replies, and he stops just briefly, glancing at her over his shoulder, measuring something again, something he cannot quite define, before continuing. Breakfast is at 7. You will be ready by 8, and you will review the schedule sent to your phone. He pauses, then adds, do not speak unless necessary in public settings. Clara nods once, not questioning, not resisting, just absorbing, but as he turns away again, her gaze lingers on the city beyond the glass, her reflection faint against the lights, smaller than the space around her, yet somehow not diminished by it. Later that evening, she walks through the penthouse alone, slow, quiet steps, fingertips grazing surfaces, noting the arrangement of books, the languages on their spines, English, French, German, Japanese, her eyes pausing for a fraction of a second longer than expected, before moving on, as if nothing has caught her attention, as if everything here is unfamiliar, and yet nothing surprises her. In the kitchen, she finds a staff member preparing tea. The woman offers a polite but distant smile. "Mrs. Hayes," she says carefully, testing the name. Clara returns the smile. Equally polite, equally controlled. "Clara is fine," she replies, her voice soft but clear. The woman hesitates, then nods, unsure how to respond, because nothing about Clara fits neatly into the role she has been assigned. The next morning arrives with precision, sunlight cutting clean lines across the marble as Clara steps into the dining area exactly on time, dressed simply but elegantly. No excess, no attempt to impress, just balance. Alexander is already seated, scanning something on his tablet. He does not look up immediately. "You are on time," he notes, as if marking a point on a chart. Clara takes her seat across from him, her posture straight, composed. "You said 7, she replies, and there is that faint pause again, that almost imperceptible shift in rhythm, as if her answers land just slightly outside his expectations. "There is a dinner tonight," he continues, sliding a tablet toward her. "International investors, you will attend, observe, and remain quiet." Clara glances at the screen. Names, companies, countries, languages hidden beneath the surface of each line. She nods once. "Of course," she says, and as Alexander returns to his tablet, already moving on, already certain of how the evening will unfold, Clara's gaze lowers for just a second longer than necessary, her fingers resting lightly on the edge of the table, steady, patient, as if she is not preparing to follow his rules, but waiting for the exact moment they no longer apply. The car comes to a smooth stop beneath a canopy of warm golden lights, the kind that turns every entrance into a quiet performance, and Clara Bennett steps out beside Alexander Hayes, the evening air cool against her skin, her dress moving just slightly with the breeze, elegant without excess, deliberate without drawing attention, exactly as instructed. And yet as she lifts her gaze to the towering glass facade of the building, there is no hesitation in her eyes, only awareness, as if she has already mapped the room she has not yet entered. Inside, the ballroom stretches wide, nearly 100 feet across, filled with voices layered in different accents, different rhythms, the low hum of wealth and influence blending into something almost indistinguishable. And Alexander's hand rests lightly at Clara's back, guiding her forward, not forceful, but firm enough to remind her of the role she is expected to play. "Stay close," he says quietly, not looking at her, already scanning the room for key faces, key opportunities. Clara nods once, her steps measured, her expression composed, as conversations ripple around them. English at first, then something softer, sharper, French drifting from a group near the bar, Japanese from another corner, German layered into a discussion by the windows, and Clara's eyes move subtly, not turning her head, just listening, just absorbing, as if none of it reaches her, as if she understands nothing beyond the surface. "Alexander." A voice calls, and he shifts immediately, his posture adjusting, his tone changing to match the moment, controlled but welcoming, as he greets a group of investors, introducing Clara with a brief glance. "My wife," he says, the words precise, practiced, and Clara inclines her head slightly, offering a polite smile, saying nothing more. Exactly as instructed, the conversation continues around her, numbers, timelines, expansion plans, but beneath it, quieter voices slip through, a woman in French. "She looks young," followed by a man's reply. "He always prefers someone easy." Clara's fingers tighten just slightly around the stem of her glass, not enough to notice, not enough to betray anything. Across the room, another group speaks in Japanese, quicker, more direct. "Does she understand anything?" one asks, followed by a soft laugh, and Clara remains still, her expression unchanged, her silence intact. Alexander continues speaking, unaware or choosing not to acknowledge, his focus fixed on the deal unfolding in front of him. And for a moment, just a moment, Clara turns her gaze toward him, not seeking attention, not asking for anything, just observing. as if measuring the distance between what he sees and what he chooses to ignore. The night moves forward. Introductions blur into conversations, conversations into negotiations, and Clara remains at his side, quiet, composed, invisible in the way he intended, until a man steps closer, switching to Spanish now, his tone casual but edged. "You must be proud," he says to Alexander, finding someone so uncomplicated. The word lingers, deliberate, and Alexander gives a faint, noncommittal smile, not correcting, not challenging, just allowing it to pass. And something shifts, subtle but real. Clara's gaze lowers for a fraction of a second, her breath steady, her posture unchanged, but beneath the stillness, something is aligning, something patient reaching its edge, because for the first time that evening, the silence she has been holding is no longer obedience, it is choice, and choices, once made, do not stay quiet forever. The laughter does not fade. It lingers just long enough to settle into the air like something accepted, something normal, and Clara Bennett stands there with her glass untouched, her posture still composed, her silence still intact, but something behind her eyes has shifted, not broken, not shaken, just decided. The man who spoke in Spanish turns slightly away, already moving on, already confident that his words required no response, because in his world, someone like her does not answer back. And for a moment longer, Clara lets that assumption exist, lets it breathe, lets it settle exactly where it belongs, and then she lifts her gaze, not abruptly, not dramatically, just enough to step into the space he created. "Uncomplicated?" she repeats softly, her voice calm, her accent flawless, and the word lands differently now, sharper, intentional. The man turns back, confusion flickering across his face as she continues in smooth, measured Spanish, each sentence clear, precise, dismantling the quiet insult with nothing but tone and truth. The surrounding conversation falters, just slightly, just enough for others to notice. And Clara does not stop. She shifts seamlessly, her voice flowing into French, addressing the woman by the bar, correcting her assumption with a level of detail that makes it impossible to ignore. Then Japanese, turning toward the group near the windows, her cadence controlled, respectful, but undeniably confident. And now the room is no longer moving around her. It is pausing, recalibrating, attention pulling toward the one person who was never meant to have it. Alexander stands beside her, completely still, the conversation he was leading dissolving without him noticing, his focus shifting entirely, not to the investors, not to the deal, but to her, as if seeing her for the first time. And Clara continues, Spanish again, then German, each transition effortless, each word placed with purpose, not to impress, not to perform, but to correct what was wrong, to restore what was taken without permission. And finally she returns to English, her voice steady, quiet, but carrying across the space that has now fallen silent. "If you are going to speak about someone," she says, her gaze moving briefly across the faces around her, "you should be certain they cannot understand you." No anger, no raised tone, just clarity, and that is what makes it land. The man who spoke first says nothing now. The woman by the bar lowers her gaze. The group by the windows shifts uncomfortably, and Alexander says nothing at all, because for the first time, there is no immediate response available to him, no controlled answer, no calculated move, only the realization that every assumption he made has just been undone in front of the very people whose respect defines his world. Clara lowers her glass slightly, her posture unchanged, her expression calm, as if nothing extraordinary has happened, as if she has simply spoken when it became necessary. And for a brief second, her eyes meet Alexander's, not seeking approval, not asking permission, just holding the moment exactly where it is, before she steps back half a pace, returning to the position she was given, except now it no longer fits, because the room has already shifted, the balance has already changed, and everyone can feel it, even if no one says it out loud. The silence does not break immediately. It stretches, thick and unfamiliar, wrapping around the room as if no one quite knows how to reclaim control of it. And Alexander Hayes stands there, his hand still loosely holding his glass, his posture unchanged, but something beneath it no longer aligned, because for the first time in a long time, he is not the one directing the moment, He is inside it, watching it unfold without permission, without preparation. Clara Bennett does not look back at the crowd again. She does not wait for a reaction. She simply turns slightly, her gaze settling somewhere beyond the noise, as if the entire exchange has already ended for her, as if she has said exactly what needed to be said and nothing more. And that is what unsettles him the most. Not the languages, not the precision, but the absence of performance. There was no need for approval in her voice, no attempt to impress, only certainty, and that certainty lingers, heavier than anything spoken. "Excuse me," Alexander finally says, his tone controlled but quieter now, not directed at anyone in particular, just enough to step away from the group that no longer feels like an advantage. And Clara follows without hesitation, her steps matching his pace but not dependent on it. They move through the edge of the ballroom, past conversations that resume in lowered tones, past glances that now linger a second too long, until they reach a quieter corridor lined with tall windows overlooking the city, the noise fading behind them, replaced by the distant hum of traffic far below. Alexander stops, turning to face her fully now, his expression composed but no longer distant. "You understood everything," he says, not a question, just a statement placed carefully between them. Clara meets his gaze without shifting. "Yes," she replies simply, no explanation offered, no apology attached, and for a moment, he studies her, as if recalculating, as if searching for the version of her that fits the role he assigned. But it is no longer there. "Why did you not say anything before?" he asks, and there is something different in his voice now. Not anger, not even frustration, just something quieter, something closer to uncertainty. Clara tilts her head slightly, considering the question. "Because you asked me not to," she answers, her tone even, factual, and the words land with a weight he did not anticipate. "Because they are true, entirely true, and that truth leaves no space for argument, only reflection." Alexander exhales slowly, his gaze dropping for a fraction of a second before returning to her. "And tonight?" he asks, and Clara's eyes hold his, steady, unflinching. "Tonight, it became necessary," she says, and there it is again, that quiet certainty, that absence of hesitation. And something shifts again, deeper this time, something that does not fit neatly into control or strategy, something that does not respond to contracts or conditions. The city lights flicker behind her, reflecting faintly in the glass, and for the first time since he met her, Alexander does not see someone invisible. He sees someone deliberate, someone who chose silence and then chose not to, and the difference between those two choices feels larger than anything written in the agreement they signed. "You should have told me," he says finally, softer now, and Clara's expression does not change. "Would it have changed anything?" she asks, not challenging, not accusing, just asking, and the question lingers, unanswered, because for the first time, Alexander Hayes does not have an immediate response, and that silence, unlike before, does not belong to her anymore. The question does not fade. It stays between them, quiet but immovable, and Alexander Hayes feels it in a way he does not recognize, not as pressure, not as confrontation, but as something far more unsettling, absence of control, because for the first time, the answer is not obvious, not immediate, and Clara Bennett does not look away. She does not fill the silence for him. She simply stands there, steady, as if she has already accepted whatever the answer might be, whether he speaks it or not, and that changes everything. "No," he says finally, the word low, almost reluctant, and it is the first honest thing he has said without calculation since the night began. Clara nods once, not surprised, not disappointed, just acknowledging the truth as it is, and that simple reaction shifts something again, deeper, quieter. Alexander straightens slightly, instinct pulling him back, toward familiarity, toward structure. "We should return," he says, his tone regaining its usual control, but it feels thinner now, less certain. Clara does not move immediately, her gaze drifting briefly toward the glass, the city stretching endlessly beyond. "You can go ahead," she says softly, and this time, it is not a request, it is a choice, and he notices it, the difference in her words, the independence in them, subtle but undeniable. He hesitates for a fraction of a second, something in him resisting the idea of leaving her there, alone, not because she needs him, but because he no longer understands where he stands in relation to her, and that unfamiliarity unsettles him more than he expects. This is still an arrangement, he says, as if reminding both of them. And Clara turns her head slightly, her expression calm. I know, she replies, and again, there is no argument, no resistance, just clarity, which somehow makes the statement feel less solid than before. He nods once, more to himself than to her, and turns, walking back toward the ballroom, the sound of voices growing louder with each step, the rhythm of business, negotiation, expectation waiting to pull him back into place. But as he re-enters the room, something is different, the conversations. Resume, the investors greet him, but their eyes shift, just slightly, not away from him, but toward where she had been, as if the balance has already been recalculated, as if the center of attention has moved and not fully returned. Impressive. One of them says in a low voice, no longer dismissive, no longer amused, and Alexander gives a brief nod, but the word does not feel like a victory. It feels like a correction. Across the room, Clara remains by the window, alone now, her reflection faint against the glass, her hands resting lightly at her sides, her posture unchanged, but the space around her feels different, not empty, not overlooked, but defined, as if she has claimed it without effort, without demand. And as the evening continues, something subtle begins to unfold. People approach her, carefully at first, choosing their words more deliberately, their tone more respectful, and Clara responds when necessary, measured, composed, never overextending, never seeking attention, only meeting it when it arrives. And Alexander watches from a distance for a moment longer than he intends, observing not the languages, not the skill, but the control she carries without needing to declare it. And for the first time, a realization forms, quiet but undeniable, that whatever he thought he had arranged, whatever boundaries he believed he had set, no longer exist in the way he defined them. And somewhere beneath that realization, something else begins to take shape, not yet clear, not yet named, but impossible to ignore. The evening does not return to what it was. It cannot, because something invisible has already shifted beneath the surface, and Alexander Hayes feels it in every conversation that follows, in the way investors now glance past him just slightly, in the way their tone softens when Clara Bennett speaks, even when she says very little, and that difference, subtle as it is, refuses to be ignored. Your wife is remarkable, one of them says quietly, no longer with amusement, but with something closer to respect, and Alexander nods, a controlled response. But inside, the word echoes differently, not as validation, but as realization, because remarkable was never part of the plan. Remarkable does not fit into contracts or conditions. Remarkable cannot be controlled. Across the room, Clara stands near the edge of a conversation, listening more than speaking, her presence no longer overlooked, but not demanded either. It exists naturally now, as if it had always belonged, and when she does respond, it is brief, precise, enough to guide the conversation without overtaking it, a balance that cannot be taught, only understood. And Alexander watches for a moment longer than necessary, noticing details he had ignored before, the way she chooses when to speak, the way she holds silence without shrinking into it, the way she never once looks to him for permission. And that last detail settles somewhere deeper than he expects, because it forces a question he has not considered, not about her, but about himself. What exactly did he think he was offering? And what exactly did she accept? The answer is no longer as simple as it was in that quiet office. Time moves forward, the event nearing its end, conversations thinning, deals quietly solidifying, and yet the energy remains altered, as if the room itself remembers what happened, as if it cannot fully return to its previous shape. When the final introductions are made, Alexander steps toward Clara again, his movement slower this time, less automatic. We are leaving, he says, but the words lack the same authority they once carried. Clara turns to him, her expression calm. Of course, she replies, and there is no resistance, no tension, but there is also no submission, just agreement, simple and equal. They walk toward the exit together, side by side, not guided, not followed, just aligned. And as the doors open and the cool night air meets them again, Alexander pauses for a fraction of a second, glancing at her, as if something remains unsaid, something he has not yet found the right language for. "You changed the outcome tonight," he says finally, and Clara looks ahead, the city lights reflecting softly in her eyes. "No," she replies gently. "I only corrected what was already wrong." And the words settle into the space between them, quiet, undeniable. And for the first time, Alexander does not try to redefine them, does not try to reshape them into something more convenient. He simply listens, and as they step into the waiting car, the door closing softly behind them, the silence that follows is no longer filled with assumptions. It is filled with something else entirely, something unfamiliar, something that does not belong to contracts or conditions, something that has begun, whether he understands it or not. The city is quieter when they return, not silent, but softened, as if the night has settled into something slower, something more reflective, and the penthouse doors close behind them with the same seamless precision as before, yet the space no longer feels exactly the same, not to him. Alexander Hayes loosens his tie again, but this time the motion is less automatic, less practiced, as if even small habits are being reconsidered. Clara Bennett steps inside without hesitation, her heels echoing lightly against the marble before fading into stillness. She does not wait for instruction, does not look for direction. She simply moves as someone who understands where she stands, and that difference, subtle as it is, does not go unnoticed. "You handled yourself well," Alexander says finally, his voice measured, but lacking the usual distance, and Clara pauses, turning slightly toward him, her expression calm. "I spoke when it was necessary," she replies, and again, there is no attempt to impress, no need for validation, only clarity. Alexander studies her for a moment, longer than before, as if trying to reconcile the person in front of him with the one he thought he had chosen. "You never mentioned your background," he says, and Clara's gaze meets his evenly. "You never asked," she answers, simple, direct, and the truth of it lands heavier than expected, because it is not an accusation, it is a fact, and facts are harder to dismiss. He exhales quietly, walking a few steps closer, not imposing, not retreating, just closing the distance enough to be present. "This arrangement was meant to be straightforward," he says, almost to himself, and Clara tilts her head slightly, considering the word. "It still is," she replies softly. "Only now it is honest." The silence that follows is different from before, not filled with control or expectation, but with awareness, the kind that does not resolve quickly. Alexander's gaze shifts briefly to the contract resting on the table, the same pages that defined everything just hours ago, and for the first time, they feel incomplete, not wrong, but insufficient, because they accounted for behavior, not for truth. "If you choose to leave," he says slowly, the words unfamiliar even as he speaks them. "The terms allow it." And Clara looks at him, not surprised, not relieved, just attentive. "And if I choose to stay," she asks, and the question settles into the space between them, not as a challenge, but as possibility. Alexander does not answer immediately, because this time, the response cannot come from habit, it cannot come from structure, it has to come from something else, something he has not yet fully understood, and that realization holds him still for a moment longer than he is used to. Finally, he meets her gaze again. Steady, unguarded in a way that feels unfamiliar. Then it would no longer be just an arrangement, he says quietly, and Clara watches him for a second, as if measuring the weight of those words, before a faint, almost imperceptible shift softens her expression, not quite a smile, but something close, something real. She nods once, slow, deliberate, and turns slightly toward the window, the city lights stretching endlessly beyond the glass, and for the first time since the contract was signed. The future does not feel predefined. It feels open, uncertain in a way that does not threaten, but invites. And as Alexander stands there beside her, no longer ahead, no longer guiding, just present, he realizes something simple and irreversible. That control was never what changed the outcome. It was the moment he stopped assuming he already knew it.